The twins had stopped crying. 3 weeks old, born barely breathing, and now too silent in their mother's shaking arms. Sophia stood barefoot on the avenue, dress plastered to her skin, rain turning the asphalt into a river of ice. And when the black sedan rolled to a stop through the downpour, the man who stepped out wasn't just anyone. A tailored suit drenched in seconds, sharp Italian features carved from stone, and eyes dark as executed judgment took in everything. The widow, the bruises on her wrist she tried to hide, the way she shielded the babies with her own body. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask where she was running. He asked one thing, voice low enough to drown in the storm but deadly enough to cut through it. Who the hell would do this? Because whoever drove a mother and her newborn twins into freezing rain like this had just signed their own death warrant. And the man they called Frank Costello never left debts unpaid. If this story grabs you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who loves redemption arcs. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Now, let's get back into the rain. The rainstorm had swallowed the city's east side whole. Sky and pavement dissolved into one merciless sheet of water where streetlights became blurred ghosts and every car horn was a distant, drowning scream. The rain didn't fall, it attacked, hammering down with the weight of concrete, as if the sky itself wanted her erased. This was the kind of storm that flooded basements, stalled traffic, drowned the future itself. Sofia Alvarez stood there, her body moving on instinct rather than thought. Her lips had gone gray. Her arms trembled so violently she could barely keep hold of the soaked blanket wrapped around Luca and Marco. Her lungs felt compressed, as though the cold had invaded her chest and wrapped icy fingers around her heart, squeezing with every desperate breath. The thin dress had been useless from the start, clinging to her like a second skin made of ice water. But Sofia was not thinking about herself. She was thinking about the twin newborns pressed against her chest. Born 2 weeks premature, the babies her husband's debts had now made into collateral. And now those twins lay exposed to rain at 40 degrees. 1 hour earlier, everything had been different. Sofia had been barricaded in her 4th-floor apartment, listening to men kick at the door, shouting that the debt was hers now. Frank Costello didn't do midnight meetings in the rain. But Victor Mancini had information worth getting wet for, a shipment route, a competitor's weakness, the kind of intelligence that turned wars before they started. The meeting had lasted 7 minutes. Frank had said 3 sentences. Victor would live another year because of them. Now the black sedan moved through streets turned into canals, wipers fighting a losing battle against sheets of water that belonged more to ocean than sky. Frank sat in the back, Giovanni driving, Marco riding shotgun with a hand resting on his concealed Glock. The city looked drowned, abandoned, apocalyptic. That's when Giovanni slowed the car. "Boss," he said quietly. "You seeing this?" Frank leaned forward. A figure stood in the middle of the avenue, not walking, not moving, just standing. A woman in a blue dress that clung to her like she'd been pulled from a river. Barefoot. Arms wrapped around something Frank couldn't quite see from this distance. Her head was down, hair plastered across her face, and even from 30 feet away, he could see her body shaking. "Pull up," Frank said. "Boss, we don't know." "I said pull up." The sedan rolled to a stop 10 feet from the woman. Frank opened his door before Marco could protest. Rain hit him like a fist, instantly soaking through his expensive suit. He didn't care. His eyes were locked on the woman. She looked up as he approached, and Frank saw everything in that single glance. Terror. Exhaustion. The kind of desperate resignation that came right before someone stopped fighting. But it was what she held that made Frank's jaw tighten. 2 babies. Newborns, wrapped in a blanket that had been white once but was now gray with rainwater. Their tiny faces were visible, eyes closed, lips tinged with blue. They weren't crying. They weren't moving. Frank's gaze dropped to the woman's wrists. Bruises, dark purple against pale skin. A scar on her left wrist that looked like it had been made by rope or wire. Her knuckles were scraped raw. This wasn't random violence. This was systematic. He took another step forward, and the woman flinched, stumbling backward. One of her feet slipped on the wet pavement, and she nearly went down. Frank's hand shot out, steadying her by the elbow. She was shaking so hard he could feel it through her skin. "Easy," Frank said, his voice quiet. "I'm not going to hurt you." The woman stared at him with eyes that had forgotten how to trust. Frank looked at her, really looked. Mid-20s, maybe. Dark hair, Hispanic features, a face that might have been beautiful before fear carved itself into every line. But it was the children she held that demanded his attention. Newborns, maybe a few weeks old at most. Premature, if he had to guess. The kind of fragile that didn't survive being out in a storm like this. He asked the only question that mattered. Who did this to you? The woman's lips moved, but no sound came out. Rain streamed down her face, mixing with tears she probably didn't even know she was crying. Frank turned to Giovanni. Get the car ready. Now. Boss. Now. Marco was already out of the passenger seat, pulling open the rear door. Frank turned back to the woman, his voice dropping lower, the kind of tone that had made hardened criminals confess to crimes they didn't commit. Listen to me. Those babies are dying. You know it, and I know it. You can stand here in the rain and let it happen, or you can get in the car. Your choice. But make it fast, because in 5 minutes, it won't matter anymore. The woman looked at the babies in her arms, then back at Frank. He could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Trust a stranger or watch her children die. Some choice. She took a step forward, then another. Her legs gave out on the third step. Frank caught her before she hit the ground, one arm supporting her back, the other carefully avoiding the babies pressed against her chest. She weighed almost nothing. Rainwater dripped from her hair, her dress, her bare feet. Marco, Frank said quietly. The children. Marco moved forward, and the woman's eyes went wide with panic. She clutched the babies tighter, a sound escaping her throat that wasn't quite words but communicated everything. Don't take them, please God, don't take them. He's going to carry them to the car, Frank said, his voice still low, still calm. You can't walk. But I promise you, nothing is going to happen to those babies. Not while I'm standing here. For 3 endless seconds, the woman stared into Frank's eyes. Then, slowly, her arms loosened. Marco took the babies with the kind of careful precision usually reserved for handling explosives, cradling them against his chest as he moved quickly toward the car. Frank lifted the woman without effort, feeling her body go limp against him. Exhaustion, hypothermia, shock, pick one. She'd probably hit all 3 an hour ago. Don't let me die, she whispered against his chest, the words barely audible over the rain. You're not dying, Frank said, carrying her toward the sedan. Not tonight. He slid into the back seat with her still in his arms, Marco already inside with the babies wrapped in his jacket. Giovanni hit the gas before Frank's door even closed, and the sedan tore through the flooded streets like a shark cutting through dark water. Frank looked down at the woman in his arms. Her eyes were closed now, her breathing shallow but steady. Rain still dripped from her hair, pooling on the leather seat. One of her hands had fallen to her side, revealing the full extent of the bruising on her wrist. Someone had tied her up. Recently. He looked at the babies Marco held. One of them, the smaller one, still wasn't moving. Frank pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd used exactly 3 times in the last 5 years. It rang once. Dr. Reyes, a woman's voice answered, crisp and alert despite the late hour. This better be. I need you at the estate. Now. 2 premature infants, severe hypothermia, possible respiratory distress, and a woman in shock. A pause. Frank. How fast can you get there? 20 minutes. Keep them warm. Don't let the babies sleep. They're not sleeping, Elena. They're not conscious. Another pause, longer this time. Then drive faster. I'm on my way. Frank hung up and looked at Giovanni in the rearview mirror. You heard her. Move. The sedan accelerated, hydroplaning through a turn, rain hammering the windshield like bullets. Marco was rubbing the baby's hands and feet, trying to generate warmth, his face tight with concentration. Frank had seen Marco kill 5 men in a warehouse without blinking. Now he looked terrified. The woman stirred in Frank's arms, her eyes opening halfway. My babies, she whispered. They're right here, Frank said, nodding toward Marco. We're taking you somewhere safe. Somewhere warm. Just hold on. He said. Her voice trailed off, her eyes struggling to focus. He said the debt lives. Frank's jaw clenched. Who said that? But she was already unconscious again, her head falling against his shoulder. Frank looked out the window at the drowned city. Rain hammered against glass, wind howled through narrow streets, and somewhere out there, someone had done this. Someone had taken a woman with newborn babies and thrown her into a storm to die. Frank Costello had built an empire on fear, respect, and the absolute certainty that crossing him meant death. Men knew better than to challenge him. Entire crime families avoided his territory. Cops took his money and asked no questions. But this was different. This wasn't business. This wasn't territory or profit or respect. This was something older. Something that lived in the place before Frank Costello became the king of the city's underworld. The place where a boy named Francesco watched his mother die because nobody cared enough to stop it. The sedan's tires screamed as Giovanni took another turn at speed, and Frank tightened his grip on the woman in his arms. "Who the hell would do this?" he said again, quieter this time, the question directed at no one and everyone. Giovanni's eyes met his in the rearview mirror. After 20 years together, words weren't always necessary. "We'll find out, boss," Giovanni said. Frank looked down at the woman, then at the babies Marco held like they were made of glass. "Yes," Frank said softly. "We will." And when they did, there wouldn't be enough rain in the world to wash away what came next. 2 hours earlier. The apartment was supposed to be safe. That's what the landlord had said when Sofia handed over 3 months' rent in cash, money she'd found hidden in a shoebox in Diego's closet after the funeral. The kind of cash that came from places she'd trained herself not to ask about. "Quiet building," the landlord had said, pocketing the money without counting it. "Nobody bothers nobody. That's how we like it here." 3 days. That's how long safe had lasted. Now Sofia sat on the edge of the bathroom sink, Luca and Marco sleeping fitfully in a drawer she'd converted into a makeshift bassinet, and listened to men outside her apartment door. "Mrs. Alvarez." The voice was smooth, almost polite. "Almost. We know you're in there. We just want to talk." The doorknob rattled. Sofia's hand flew to her mouth, stifling the sound that tried to escape. "Your husband owed money to some very important people. But here's the thing, debts don't die just because the debtor does. You understand that, right?" Another voice, younger, less patient. "Come on, just kick the damn door. We're being civilized, Tommy. Mrs. Alvarez appreciates that, don't you?" Sofia looked at her babies sleeping in the drawer. 3 weeks old. Born 2 weeks early because the stress of Diego's gambling had triggered premature labor. The doctor had said they needed warmth, needed careful monitoring, needed everything Sofia couldn't provide now that Diego was dead and his debts were very much alive. The door shook with impact. Once. Twice. 3 times. Sofia grabbed the drawer with both babies inside, moving on pure instinct now. The bathroom window. It led to a fire escape. She'd checked it the first night, old habits from a childhood spent running from her father's creditors. Last chance, Mrs. Alvarez. The window stuck. Sofia bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood, pulling with strength she didn't know she had. The window shrieked open, and the sound of the rain hit her like a slap. Cold, violent, endless. The apartment door splintered. Sofia climbed through the window, the metal drawer clutched against her chest, babies startling awake but not crying yet. The fire escape was slick with rain, rust flaking off under her bare feet. She'd kicked off her shoes because they made too much noise. Now she regretted it. She's running. Sofia didn't look back. She took the fire escape ladder 2 rungs at a time, the drawer banging against her side, rain instantly soaking through her dress. 3 floors down felt like 30. Her feet slipped twice. The second time, she nearly dropped the drawer. She hit the alley at a sprint, rain turning the ground into a minefield of puddles and trash. Behind her, she heard men on the fire escape, their boots clanging against metal. Don't let her get to the street. But she was already there, bursting onto the sidewalk, rain hitting her so hard it felt like punishment from God himself. People should have been out, even at this hour. But the storm had emptied the streets. No cars. No pedestrians. Just rain and darkness and the sound of men getting closer. Sofia ran. She didn't know where she was going. Away. Anywhere. The babies were crying now, thin wails that barely carried over the storm. Her arms burned from holding the metal drawer. Her feet were bleeding, leaving red prints that the rain washed away instantly. She turned down an alley, hoping to lose them. Wrong choice. The alley dead-ended into a brick wall. Sophia spun around, and there they were, two men in dark coats, walking toward her with the confidence of people who knew she had nowhere left to run. "Come on now," the smooth-voiced one said. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Sophia looked at the wall behind her, then at the men in front, then down at her babies crying in the drawer. In that moment, she understood with perfect clarity that she was going to die in this alley. They'd take the babies, leverage they'd called them, and she'd die here in the rain with no one to even notice she was gone. She thought of Diego, lying in his casket with a bullet hole in his forehead. She thought of the note they'd left next to his body. "The debt lives." "Please," Sophia said, and hated herself for begging. "Please, they're just babies." "That's exactly why they're valuable," the smooth-voiced man said. He was close now, close enough that she could see his face in the dim streetlight. Young, maybe 30, with the kind of features that probably made women trust him right up until he hurt them. "You want them to live? Then you do what we say. Simple." The second man, Tommy, grabbed her arm. His grip was iron. "Let's go." Sophia did something she'd never done before. She'd never been violent, never been the type to fight back. Diego had seen to that, training her to stay quiet, to keep her head down, to survive by being invisible. She slammed the metal drawer into Tommy's face. He staggered back, blood streaming from his nose, and Sophia ran. Out of the alley, back onto the street, the drawer clutched so tight her knuckles went white. She could hear Tommy screaming behind her, could hear both men giving chase, but she didn't care anymore. She just ran. The city blurred around her. Buildings, streetlights, parked cars, all of it melted into streaks of color through the rain. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed. The babies were crying so hard now, their little bodies shaking with each sob. And then somehow, she was on the avenue. The wide one that cut through the east side like a scar. She didn't remember how she got there. Didn't remember the turns she'd taken. Her mind had gone somewhere else, some primitive place where only movement mattered. She stopped in the middle of the street. Not because she wanted to. Because her body simply gave up, refusing to take another step. The drawer felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The baby's cries were getting weaker. Or maybe she was just going deaf. Sophia looked down at Luca and Marco. Their lips were turning blue. Their tiny fingers were curled into fists, but those fists weren't moving anymore. Behind her, she could hear Tommy and his partner getting closer, their footsteps echoing through the rain. Sophia closed her eyes. "I'm sorry," she thought. "I'm so sorry." And then she heard the car. The estate appeared through the rain like something out of a film noir, all iron gates and stone walls and the kind of old money that didn't advertise itself. The gates opened before the sedan even stopped, guards stepping aside as Giovanni pulled through. The house itself was massive, 3 stories of dark brick and tall windows that glowed warm against the storm. Sophia saw it through half-closed eyes, her body still shaking despite the heat blasting from the car's vents. The sedan stopped in a circular driveway. Doors opened. Hands reached for her, gentle hands, careful hands. A woman's voice, older, with an accent Sophia couldn't place. "Dios mio. Giovanni, get them inside. Now." Sophia felt herself being lifted, carried through rain that seemed determined to follow her even here. Then warmth, sudden overwhelming warmth that made her skin burn. She was inside. Marble floors. A curved staircase. A chandelier that looked like it cost more than every apartment she'd ever lived in combined. Upstairs, Frank's voice, still calm, still in control. "Rosa, I need blankets. Dry clothes. Get the nursery ready. The nursery hasn't been used in." "Now, Rosa." Footsteps, running. More voices. Sophia tried to focus, tried to understand what was happening, but her mind kept sliding away like water down a drain. Someone was rubbing her hands, her feet. The friction hurt, pins and needles shooting up her legs. She tried to pull away. "I know it hurts," a woman's voice said, the older woman, Rosa. "But we need to get your blood moving. Stay with me, Mija. Stay awake." "My babies," Sophia managed. "Where?" "Right here." Another voice, professional, clipped. "I've got them." Sophia forced her eyes open. A woman in her 40s, black hair pulled back, wearing scrubs under a rain-soaked coat. She had both babies, one in each arm, and was moving toward a room Sophia couldn't quite see. "Marco needs immediate attention," the woman doctor said. "Respiratory rate is dangerously low." "Whatever you need, Elena," Frank said. He was standing near the doorway, rain still dripping from his suit, his expression unreadable. The doctor disappeared into the room with the babies, and Sophia tried to follow, tried to get up, but her legs wouldn't work. She was on a couch now, leather expensive, already soaked from her dress. "Easy," Rosa said, wrapping a blanket around Sophia's shoulders. "The doctor is the best in the city. Your babies are in good hands." "You don't understand," Sophia said, her voice cracking. "I can't pay for this. I don't have." "Nobody asked you to pay," Frank said from the doorway. His eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. "Right now, you focus on breathing. Let us handle everything else." Sophia wanted to argue, wanted to explain that accepting help from strangers, especially strangers who looked like Frank Costello, was how people ended up with debts they couldn't repay. But before she could form words, a sound came from the other room. A baby crying. Not both babies. Just one. Sophia's heart stopped. "Which one?" she whispered. "Which one is crying?" Rosa's hand tightened on her shoulder, and Sophia knew. She knew. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. Frank caught her before she hit the floor, his arms surprisingly gentle for someone who moved like violence was a second language. "Let me see him," Sophia said, or maybe she was screaming, she couldn't tell anymore. "Please, let me see him." Frank carried her into the room. It was large, clearly meant to be a nursery at some point, wallpaper with faded teddy bears, furniture covered in sheets. Dr. Elena was bent over a table, one baby in front of her, her hands moving with practiced precision. CPR. She was performing CPR on a baby who weighed maybe 5 pounds. Sophia made a sound that wasn't human, a raw animal noise that came from a place deeper than words. Frank's arms tightened around her, holding her upright. "Come on," Dr. Elena muttered, her hands still moving in careful compressions. "Come on, pequeño. Breathe." Seconds stretched. The world narrowed to the doctor's hands and the baby who wasn't breathing. Somewhere, the other twin was crying, but Sophia couldn't hear it anymore. Couldn't hear anything except the silence where Marco's crying should have been. Dr. Elena sealed her mouth over the baby's nose and mouth, giving a careful breath. Waited. Another breath. Marco's chest rose. Fell. Rose again. And then faint, so faint Sophia almost missed it, a cry. Weak. Stuttering. But there. Dr. Elena sagged, her hands still on the baby but no longer moving. "Got him," she breathed. "I got him." Sophia's legs gave out completely. Frank lowered her to the floor carefully, and she knelt there, shaking so hard she couldn't see straight. Rosa was next to her suddenly, holding her, rocking her like she was the child. "He's breathing," Rosa whispered. "Gracias a Dios, he's breathing." Dr. Elena wrapped Marco in a warm blanket, checking his vitals with swift efficiency. "He's stable. For now. But I need to monitor both of them closely for the next 24 hours. Hypothermia in premature infants is," she stopped, seeing Sophia's face. "They're going to be okay. Both of them." Frank was standing by the window now, his back to the room, looking out at the rain. His hands were braced against the window frame, and even from across the room, Sophia could see them shaking. "Sir," a male voice said from the doorway. A man in his 50s, gray hair, the kind of steady presence that suggested he'd seen worse and survived. "We've secured the perimeter. No signs of pursuit." Frank didn't turn around. "Jerome, I need you to find out who these people are. Quietly. Nobody moves on this until I say so." "Already working on it, boss." Frank finally turned, his eyes finding Sophia's. "You're safe here. You and your children. Nobody's getting through those gates." Sophia wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that safety existed anywhere in the world. But she'd learned the hard way that safety was an illusion, and debts always came due. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "They won't stop. The debt." "I don't understand." Frank's voice was soft, dangerous. "Mrs. Alvarez, men have tried to kill me in my own house before. They're all dead now. So when I tell you that you're safe here, I mean it. The question is, who are they, and what debt are we talking about? Sophia looked at her babies, Marco still too pale, Luca crying softly in a bassinet Dr. Elena had produced from somewhere. She thought about Diego, about the shoebox full of cash, about the men who'd chased her through the rain. She thought about Tommy's face when she'd hit him with the drawer, the blood streaming from his nose, the way he'd looked at her like she'd just signed her own death warrant. And she thought about the smooth-voiced man, the one who'd said the babies were valuable specifically because they were babies. His name was Diego, Sophia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Diego Alvarez. My husband. And 3 weeks ago, someone put a bullet in his head because he stole $2 million from the wrong people. Frank's expression didn't change. Who? I don't know. He never told me. Sophia looked up at him, tears she didn't remember crying streaming down her face. But they left a note next to his body. 3 words. What did it say? Sophia's voice broke. The debt lives. The room went silent except for the baby's breathing and the rain hammering against the windows. Frank turned to Jerome. Find out everything. Diego Alvarez, stolen money, execution 3 weeks ago. I want names. I want locations. I want to know who's dumb enough to chase a woman with newborns into a storm. Jerome nodded once and left. Frank looked back at Sophia. You'll stay here until this is resolved. Rosa will get you dry clothes, a room, whatever you need. Dr. Elena will monitor the babies around the clock. And in the morning, you and I are going to have a longer conversation about exactly what your husband got you into. I can't, Sophia started. You can and you will. Frank's voice was final. Because right now, Mrs. Alvarez, I'm the only thing standing between you and whoever left that note. So we're going to figure this out together, and then we're going to make sure it never happens again. Understood. Sophia nodded, too exhausted to argue. Frank moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. That drawer you were carrying, where did you get it? The apartment. It was all I had to carry them. Something crossed Frank's face, too quick to read. You carried newborn twins 3 blocks in a metal drawer during a rainstorm. I didn't have a choice. No, Frank said quietly. I suppose you didn't. He looked at her for a long moment. Get some rest, Mrs. Alvarez. We'll talk in the morning. He left, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Rosa squeezed Sophia's shoulder. Come on, Mija. Let's get you cleaned up. The babies are safe with Dr. Elena. But Sophia couldn't move. She knelt there on the floor, staring at Marco and Luca, watching their chests rise and fall, terrified that if she looked away for even a second, they'd stop breathing again. Rosa seemed to understand. She brought more blankets, built a nest of pillows on the floor next to the bassinets. You can sleep right here. I'll bring you food and clean clothes. But you need to rest, Mija. Your babies need you strong. Sophia lay down on the pillows, her hand reaching through the bassinet bars to touch Marco's tiny foot. Through the window, she could see the rain still falling, but it felt distant now, muted, like it belonged to a different world. In the hallway outside, she heard Frank's voice, low and cold. I want to know who did this, Jerome. And when you find them, don't tell me. Just make them disappear. How permanent are we talking? There's only one kind of permanent. Footsteps fading. Doors closing. Sophia closed her eyes, her hand still touching Marco's foot, and for the first time in 3 weeks, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd survive until morning. Sophia woke to sunlight. Real sunlight, not the gray half-light that had dominated the past 3 weeks. It streamed through tall windows, warming her face, and for a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she heard the babies. She sat up fast, too fast, her vision swimming. The bassinets were exactly where they'd been, Marco and Luca both awake, both making the soft grunting sounds that preceded crying. But they were alive. They were alive. Easy. Dr. Elena appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray. Your blood pressure's probably still low. Move slowly. Sophia ignored her, crawling to the bassinets. Marco's color looked better. Luca was actively complaining, his tiny fists waving. She picked up Marco carefully, terrified he'd shatter in her arms. He didn't shatter. He just existed. Warm and solid and breathing. I checked them both 20 minutes ago, Dr. Elena said, setting the tray down. Tea, toast, fruit. Marco's lungs are clear. Luca never had respiratory distress. They're going to be fine. How long was I asleep? 14 hours. Sophia stared at her. 14. She looked at the windows, at the sunlight. Morning had become afternoon. You needed it. Dr. Elena handed her the tea. Drink. Your body's been through hell. The tea was good, real tea, not the cheap bag Sophia used to buy. She drank it while holding Marco, feeling his heartbeat against her chest. Something inside her that had been clenched tight for weeks finally began to loosen. There's clean clothes in the bathroom, Dr. Elena said. Shower's hot. Rosa will watch the babies. I don't want to leave them. I know. But you smell like rain and fear, and your babies need a healthy mother, not a sick one. 20 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Sophia wanted to argue, but she caught a glimpse of herself in a mirror across the room. She looked dead. Hollow eyes, gray skin, hair matted with dried rain. The babies deserved better than a ghost for a mother. She showered in a bathroom that was larger than her old apartment's entire kitchen. The hot water hurt at first, pins and needles across skin that had been too cold for too long. But she stood there anyway, letting it burn, watching the rain and street grime spiral down the drain. When she emerged 20 minutes later, wearing clothes Rosa had left, soft jeans, a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Sophia made in a month, she found Rosa sitting in a rocking chair with both babies, humming something in Spanish. Better. Rosa asked. Better. Mr. Costello wants to speak with you. In his study. I'll stay with the babies. Sophia's brief sense of peace evaporated. Now. When you're ready. Rosa's dark eyes were kind. But soon, Mija. He needs to know what he's dealing with. The study was on the second floor, down a hallway lined with art that Sophia knew instinctively was real. Not prints, not reproductions, but actual paintings worth more than most people made in a lifetime. She found the door half open, Frank visible through the gap, sitting behind a massive oak desk, reading something on a tablet. She knocked quietly. Come in, Mrs. Alvarez. The study was all dark wood and leather, books lining floor-to-ceiling shelves. Two other men were there, Jerome, whom she recognized from last night, and a younger man, maybe 30, with an edge to him that suggested violence was always close to the surface. This is Vince, Frank said, not looking up from the tablet. He works for me. You can speak freely. Sophia doubted she could speak freely anywhere, but she stepped inside anyway, closing the door behind her. Frank set down the tablet and looked at her properly. In daylight, he looked different, older than she'd thought, probably early 40s, with a kind of face that had been handsome once and was still striking despite the hardness that had settled into every line. His eyes were his most notable feature, dark and assessing, the eyes of someone who saw too much and forgot nothing. Sit, he said, gesturing to a leather chair across from the desk. Sophia sat. Frank leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. I'm going to ask you questions, and you're going to answer them honestly. If you lie to me, I'll know. If you hold back information, I'll find out eventually, and I'll be significantly less charitable when I do. Understood? Yes. Good. Let's start with your husband. Diego Alvarez. Tell me about him. Sophia took a breath. We met 4 years ago. He was charming, attentive. Everything my father wasn't. We got married after 6 months. Fast. I was 21 and stupid. Sophia looked at her hands. By the time I realized what he was, I was already pregnant. What was he? A gambler. Not the recreational kind. The kind that loses rent money on Tuesday and swears he'll win it back by Friday. The kind that borrows from friends, then from loan sharks, then from... She trailed off. From people like the ones who killed him, Frank finished. Yes. The twins. They're his. Of course they're his. Sophia's voice sharpened. What kind of question is that? The kind I need answered. Frank's expression didn't change. I'm not judging you, Mrs. Alvarez. I'm trying to understand who wants you dead and why. Sophia forced herself to breathe. Yes. They're Diego's. Born 2 weeks early because the stress of watching him spiral triggered labor. The doctors said another week of stress might have killed all 3 of us. And Diego's debt. How much? 2 million. Maybe more. He never told me the exact number. Vince whistled low. Jerome's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his posture. That's not gambling debt, Frank said quietly. That's theft. I know. Sophia's voice cracked. I found out the night they killed him. He came home covered in blood, not his own, he said, with a duffel bag full of cash. Said we had to leave, right then, no questions. But before we could even pack, they came. Who came? I don't know their names. 5 men. They dragged him outside while I was still in the bedroom with the twins. I heard. She stopped, swallowed. I heard the gunshot. Then one of them came back inside and left a note on the kitchen table. 3 words, the debt lives. Frank was silent for a long moment. And the men who chased you last night? Different men. Younger. One called himself Tommy. The other one. Sophia closed her eyes, remembering the smooth voice, the almost polite threats. He said the twins were valuable. That debts don't die just because the debtor does. Leverage, Jerome said quietly. They want to use the children to control you. Control me for what? Sophia looked between them. I don't have anything. Diego spent everything we had. I don't know where he hid the money. I don't know who he stole from. I don't know anything. But they think you do, Frank said. Or they think you can be useful in other ways. Either way, they've made you a target. Then what am I supposed to do? The words came out sharper than intended. I have newborn twins. No money. No family. Nowhere to go. If you're just going to tell me I'm screwed, I already knew that. Frank stood, moving to the window. Outside, the ground stretched green and manicured despite yesterday's storm. You're not screwed, Mrs. Alvarez. You're under my protection now. Which means anyone who comes after you comes after me. Why? Sophia stood too, suddenly angry. You don't know me. You found me in the rain and now you're acting like I'm your responsibility. Why? Frank turned, and for the first time, something other than calculation showed in his eyes. Something old and wounded. Because 30 years ago, I was 7 years old, hiding in a closet while men murdered my mother and sister in the next room. My father found us the next morning. He put a gun in his mouth 3 weeks later because he couldn't live with the fact that he wasn't there to protect us. Frank's voice was steady, but Sophia heard the razor edge beneath it. So when I see a woman standing in a storm with babies who are going to die if no one helps, I help. That clear enough for you? Sophia sat down slowly. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be honest. Because the only way I can protect you is if I know everything. Frank returned to his desk. Jerome's been digging into your husband's activities. Tell her. Jerome opened a folder. Diego Alvarez worked as a courier for the Reyes organization. Low-level stuff at first, moving packages, delivering messages. But 6 months ago, he graduated to cash transport. That's when things went sideways. The Reyes organization, Sophia repeated. Who are they? Mid-tier operation, Vince said. Drugs, gambling, some protection rackets. They've been trying to expand into Costello territory for the past year. Frank's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And they've been testing boundaries. Small things. A gambling house here, a distribution point there. Nothing worth going to war over. Until now. Your husband stole from a Reyes transport, Jerome continued. 2 million in cash meant for a weapons buy. He replaced it with newspapers and stashed the real money somewhere. The Reyes crew didn't notice until the buyers opened the case. Jesus, Sophia whispered. The Reyes organization executed him as an example, Jerome said. But they want their money back. And they think you know where it is. I don't. I've told you. We believe you, Frank said. But they don't. Which means they'll keep coming. Unless we stop them. Sofia looked at him. How? By giving them something they value more than $2 million. What could possibly? Fear, Frank said simply. The Reyes organization has been operating on the assumption that I won't escalate over small territorial disputes. They're about to learn they were wrong. You're going to start a war. Over me. I'm going to end a war, Mrs. Alvarez. There's a difference. Frank's eyes met hers. The question is, are you ready to tell me everything? Every detail about that night, about Diego's activities, about the men who chased you? Because if I'm going to burn the Reyes organization to the ground, I need to know exactly who I'm burning. Sofia thought about Marco, his chest finally rising and falling in steady rhythm. About Luca, crying healthy and strong. About the feeling of hot water in a safe bathroom, of clean clothes that didn't smell like fear. About the alternative, running forever, looking over her shoulder, waiting for the day they found her and took her babies as payment for sins she didn't commit. His name was Mateo Reyes, Sofia said quietly. Diego mentioned him once, when he was drunk. Said Mateo was paranoid, brutal and stupid, a dangerous combination. He ran the operation out of a warehouse near the docks. She looked up at Frank. That's all I know. I swear. Frank nodded to Jerome, who was already typing on his phone. That's enough, Frank said. The rest we can find. He stood, extending his hand. You and your children are safe here, Mrs. Alvarez. You have my word. Sofia took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, the hand of someone who'd killed people and saved them in equal measure. Thank you, she said, and meant it. Frank's expression softened, just slightly. Go back to your babies. Rosa will make sure you have everything you need. And Mrs. Alvarez? That drawer you carried them in, we're getting you a proper carrier. Maybe two. Despite everything, Sofia almost smiled. That would be nice. As she reached the door, Frank spoke again. One more thing. When this is over, when the Reyes organization is gone and you're truly safe, what will you do? Sofia turned. I don't know. Find an apartment. Get a job. Try to give them a normal life. That's a good answer, Frank said. Hold on to it. You're going to need it. Sofia left the study, her legs steadier than when she'd entered. Behind her, she heard Vince's voice. Boss, if we move on Reyes, the other families will see it as. I don't care what they see it as, Frank said. Make the calls. Sofia walked back to the nursery, where Rosa was still humming to the twins. She picked up Marco, then Luca, holding them both against her chest. They were warm. They were breathing. They were alive. And for the first time since Diego died, Sofia let herself believe they might actually stay that way. Frank stood at his office window long after Sofia left, watching rain clouds gather again on the horizon. Jerome and Vince remained seated, waiting. They knew better than to interrupt when Frank went somewhere inside himself. The Reyes warehouse, Frank said finally, not turning around. What do we know? Jerome flipped through his tablet. Industrial District, Pier 23. Three-story brick building, built in the 60s. Reyes uses the ground floor for legitimate shipping, furniture, mostly. Second floor is where the real business happens. Third floor is Mateo's office. Security. 8 men during the day. 12 at night. Armed, but not military grade. Mateo's paranoid, but cheap. He doesn't invest in real protection. Cameras. Standard commercial system. We can loop the feed without them noticing for maybe 20 minutes before someone checks. Frank turned. I'm not hitting the warehouse. Vince leaned forward. Boss, if we're sending a message. I said I'm ending this, not starting a street war. Frank moved back to his desk, pulling up a map on his computer. Mateo Reyes has been in business for 8 years. He's survived this long because he's cautious. He doesn't take unnecessary risks, doesn't expose himself. But he has one weakness. What's that? Jerome asked. His brother. Vince's eyes lit up with understanding. Carlos. Carlos Reyes, Frank confirmed. Younger brother, former boxer, now head of enforcement. Mateo trusts him completely. Let Carlos handle the wet work while Mateo counts money in his office. The problem is, Carlos is also Mateo's only real family. Their parents are dead. No wife, no kids. Just the two of them. Jerome nodded slowly. You want to leverage Carlos. I want to have a conversation with Carlos. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere his brother can't interrupt. Frank pulled up a photo. Carlos Reyes, 35, muscular, scar across his left eyebrow. He trains at Malone's gym every morning at 6. Alone. No security, no backup. Just him and a heavy bag. Overconfident, Vince said. Or comfortable, Frank replied. He's been doing it for 3 years. Routine makes you predictable. Predictable makes you vulnerable. You want us to grab him? Jerome asked. I want you to arrange a meeting. Politely. Make it clear we're not there to hurt him, we're there to talk business. And if he refuses? Frank's expression hardened. Then we make it less polite. But I don't think it'll come to that. Carlos is a soldier, not an idiot. He'll recognize when he's outnumbered. Vince stood. I'll handle it. Tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning, Frank confirmed. Take 4 men. No guns visible, I want this civil. But make sure everyone understands that if Carlos makes a move, we respond immediately. Got it, boss. Vince headed for the door. Vince, Frank called. The younger man stopped. No cowboy shit. We're not starting a war if we can avoid it. Clear. Crystal. After Vince left, Jerome remained seated, studying Frank with a kind of careful attention that came from 2 decades of friendship. You sure about this, Frank? The Reyes organization might be mid-tier, but they've got connections. We move on them, other families might see weakness. Let them see what they want, Frank said. I didn't build this empire by worrying about optics. No, you built it by choosing your battles carefully. Jerome leaned forward. That woman and her kids, they're not our responsibility. We could relocate them, give them cash, send them somewhere the Reyes crew won't find them. Why risk everything? Frank was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. You remember Isabella? Jerome's expression shifted. Of course. After they killed her, after my father, Frank stopped, collecting himself. I promised myself I'd never let it happen again. Never stand by while innocent people got hurt because men like us decided their lives were acceptable collateral damage. Frank, you can't save everyone. I'm not trying to save everyone, Jerome. I'm trying to save those 2 babies sleeping upstairs. And their mother, who had the strength to run through a storm with nothing but a metal drawer and her children. Frank met Jerome's eyes. You saw her wrist. You saw the bruises. That woman's been through hell, and she's still fighting. That deserves something. Jerome nodded slowly. All right. But when we move on Reyes, we do it smart. No exposure, no blowback. We make it look like internal conflict. Exactly what I was thinking, Frank said. Mateo's been skimming from his own crew. 3 of his lieutenants know it. We approach them, offer protection and a percentage if they turn on him. Mateo falls, the organization collapses, and nobody traces it back to us. That'll take time. We have time. Sofia and her children aren't going anywhere. Reyes doesn't know where she is, and he won't figure it out. Not before we're ready. A knock at the door interrupted them. Rosa entered, her expression concerned. Mr. Costello, you should come upstairs. It's the little one, Marco. Frank was moving before she finished the sentence, Jerome right behind him. They took the stairs 2 at a time, reaching the nursery to find Dr. Elena bent over Marco's bassinet, stethoscope pressed to his tiny chest. Sofia stood nearby, her face bloodless. What's wrong? Frank demanded. Respiratory distress, Dr. Elena said, not looking up. His lungs sound congested. Could be pneumonia from last night's exposure. I need to get him to a hospital. No hospitals, Frank said immediately. Too exposed. Frank, he needs. Bring the equipment here. Whatever you need. I'll pay triple your usual rate. Dr. Elena looked at him. This isn't about money. If he goes into respiratory failure, then you'll save him. Here, where it's safe. Frank's voice was steel. Make a list. Jerome will have everything delivered within the hour. Dr. Elena stared at him for a moment, then nodded. I'll need oxygen equipment, antibiotics, monitoring devices, and a pediatric respiratory specialist I trust. Done. Jerome. I'll make it happen, Jerome said, already on his phone. Sophia moved to Marco's bassinet, her hand hovering over him like she was afraid to touch him. Is he going to die? No, Frank said, and realized he meant it with every fiber of his being. He's not going to die. Not here. Not under my roof. Dr. Elena was already writing a list, her pen flying across paper. I need these items in 45 minutes, not an hour. Every minute counts. You'll have them in 30, Jerome said. Frank watched Sophia standing over her son, her whole body trembling. He thought about Isabella, about his mother, about all the people he'd failed to save because he wasn't strong enough or fast enough or ruthless enough. Not this time. Mrs. Alvarez, Frank said quietly. Sophia looked at him, tears streaming down her face. Your son is going to live. I promise you. You can't promise that. Yes, Frank said. I can. And for the first time in 30 years, Frank Costello meant to keep a promise that had nothing to do with money, power, or revenge. This one was about something simpler, and infinitely more complicated, making sure a little boy got to grow up with a mother who loved him. The Vanguard Hotel stood like a monument to forgotten elegance on the industrial waterfront, marble columns stained with decades of salt spray, a lobby that had once hosted senators and shipping magnates, now home to rats and the kind of business that thrived in shadows. Frank Costello arrived at 3 a.m., the hour when the city held its breath between yesterday's sins and tomorrow's reckoning. Giovanni parked the sedan in an alley 2 blocks away. Marco checked his weapon. Vince scanned the rooftops through binoculars. 8 men on the perimeter, Vince reported. 2 on the roof. Standard configuration for someone who thinks he's being careful. Mateo Reyes thinks a lot of things, Frank said, buttoning his suit jacket. Most of them wrong. They moved through the lobby like ghosts, past a night clerk who suddenly found his newspaper fascinating. The elevator groaned upward, cables protesting weight they were never meant to carry. 3rd floor. Suite 304. 2 men flanked the door, young, nervous, hands hovering near concealed weapons they'd never have time to draw. Frank didn't look at them. He knocked once, firm and deliberate. The door opened to reveal Carlos Reyes. Frank had seen the photographs, but they hadn't captured the sheer physical presence of the man. 6'3", shoulders that belonged on a heavyweight boxer, hands scarred from years of violence. A scar bisected his left eyebrow, souvenir from a fight he'd won by breaking his opponent's jaw in 3 places. But it was his eyes that told the real story. Not empty, not cruel. Just tired. The eyes of a man who'd done terrible things long enough that they no longer registered as terrible. Mr. Costello, Carlos said, his voice surprisingly soft. My brother's been expecting you. I'm sure he has. The suite beyond was all cheap luxury, velvet curtains hiding water-stained walls, furniture that looked expensive until you noticed the cigarette burns. Mateo Reyes sat behind a desk that probably weighed more than the room was worth, flanked by 3 more men with dead eyes and ready hands. Mateo himself was smaller than Frank expected. Mid-40s, thinning hair slicked back, expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the softness around his middle. He looked like an accountant who'd accidentally wandered into the wrong profession and decided to stay. Frank Costello. Mateo's smile never reached his eyes. To what do I owe the pleasure? Frank didn't sit. Diego Alvarez. $2 million. A widow and 2 newborns hunted through a rainstorm. Ring any bells? Rosa said nothing. Just placed a blanket over Emma and quietly left. Frank looked down at the sleeping child, then back at Isabella's photograph. For the first time in 3 decades, he thought maybe, just maybe, protecting something good was more important than punishing everything bad. Emma stirred, mumbling in her sleep, Uncle Knight. Frank's eyes burned. He didn't cry. Frank Costello didn't cry. But his hands shook as he held Emma closer, and when Rosa checked on them an hour later, Frank was still sitting there, staring at his sister's picture, thinking about second chances and the strange mercy of storms that brought broken people to your door. Outside, the sun climbed higher, warming the grounds, burning away the last traces of rain. Inside, something harder than stone but more fragile than glass began, very slowly, to heal. 72 hours came and went. Mateo Reyes didn't leave. Frank knew this because Jerome had eyes on every Reyes operation, every warehouse, every low-level soldier who scratched his ass without permission. The organization hadn't just stayed, it had dug in deeper, moving operations to more secure locations, doubling security, preparing for war. "He thinks you're bluffing," Jerome said, standing in Frank's study at 11 p.m., rain starting again outside. "Or he's too stupid to know better." "Both, probably." Frank stared at the city lights through the window. Somewhere out there, Mateo Reyes was making the last mistake of his life. How many men does he have? 24 confirmed. Another dozen on call. He's pulled in resources from Philadelphia. Out-of-town muscle. He's scared. Not scared enough. Vince leaned against the bookshelf, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. "Boss, we need to move before he does. Every day we wait." "I'm not starting a war in my own house with children sleeping upstairs," Frank said quietly. "We do this clean. Controlled. Away from here. Then let me take a team to his warehouse. Tomorrow night. Quiet, professional, nobody traces it back." Frank considered this. The old Frank, the one who existed before a woman collapsed in the rain with dying babies, would have agreed immediately. Surgical strike, no witnesses, problem solved. But Emma's voice echoed in his head, "You're a knight." "Give him until Friday," Frank said. "One more day. If he's still here, we move." Jerome and Vince exchanged glances, but didn't argue. They'd learned decades ago that Frank's instincts kept them alive. After they left, Frank walked upstairs to check on Sophia and the children. It had become routine these past 3 days, late-night rounds to ensure the twins were breathing steadily, that Emma was sleeping soundly, that Sophia hadn't woken from nightmares. He found Emma's door open, the little girl sitting up in bed, staring at the rain streaking her window. "Can't sleep?" Frank asked from the doorway. Emma shook her head. "The rain sounds angry." Frank entered the room, sitting carefully on the edge of her bed. "It's just rain." The bad rain brought the bad men. Emma hugged her stuffed rabbit. "What if they come back?" "They won't." "How do you know?" Frank looked at this child who'd somehow decided he was a knight, despite everything he'd done, everyone he'd killed. "Because I won't let them. That's my job." "Protecting people?" "Protecting you. Your brothers. Your mother." Emma was quiet for a moment, then scooted closer, leaning against his side. "I heard Rosa talking to Dr. Elena. She said you told the bad men to leave or you'd make them disappear." "Rosa talks too much," Frank muttered. "Will you make them disappear?" The question hung between them, innocent and terrible. Frank thought about lying, about telling her that violence wasn't the answer, that the world worked through laws and justice and civilized solutions. But Emma had seen her mother beaten, had been hunted through streets by men who wanted to use her as leverage. She deserved honesty, even if it was uncomfortable. "If they don't leave," Frank said carefully, "I'll make sure they can't hurt you. Whatever that takes." Emma nodded, satisfied. "Good. Because knights fight dragons. There are no dragons. The bad men are dragons. They just look like people." She looked up at him with those enormous eyes. "Rosa says you were sad for a very long time. Since your sister went away." Frank's jaw tightened. Rosa really needs to stop talking. "Are you still sad?" "Every day." "Me too. About my daddy." Emma's voice went small. "But Mama says sad doesn't mean forever. It just means for now." Frank had no response to that. This 5-year-old had more wisdom about grief than he'd accumulated in 30 years. "You should sleep," he said finally. Emma lay back down, but kept hold of his hand. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" "Mama does that, but she's feeding Marco." Frank should have said no. Should have made an excuse about work, about meetings, about the 1,000 responsibilities that demanded his attention. But Emma's small hand in his larger one felt like an anchor, keeping him tethered to something that mattered more than revenge or territory or respect. "All right," he said. "I'll stay." Emma smiled and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing deepened, fingers relaxing but not quite letting go. Frank sat there in the dim light, listening to rain and a child's breathing, and thought about Isabella. She would have been 46 now. Might have had children of her own. Might have given Frank nieces and nephews, given their father grandchildren, given the family a future that extended beyond blood and business. Instead, she was frozen at 19, laughing on a beach, because men like the ones Frank had become decided her life was acceptable collateral. "Are you still sad?" "Every day." But for the first time in 3 decades, Frank felt something besides sadness when he thought about Isabella. He felt purpose. The kind that came from protecting something precious instead of avenging something lost. Emma's hand twitched in his. She murmured something that sounded like "Uncle Night," and rolled over. Frank carefully extracted his hand and stood, tucking the blanket around her. As he reached the door, he looked back once. "I won't let them hurt you," he whispered. "I promise." He closed the door quietly and walked downstairs, where Giovanni waited in the foyer, phone in hand, expression grim. "Boss," Giovanni said, "we've got a problem." 2:47 a.m. The security alarm didn't trip. The perimeter sensors didn't trigger. The cameras showed nothing. That should have been Frank's first warning. Professionals good enough to bypass his systems, patient enough to wait for the perfect moment, stupid enough to try. The only reason they didn't succeed was because Marco, loyal, paranoid Marco, had insisted on doing physical rounds every 3 hours. Which is how he found the 3 men in tactical gear moving silently through the east wing toward the nursery. The gunshot that killed the first intruder woke the entire house. Sophia jerked awake to the sound that haunted her nightmares, a gunshot, close and sharp, followed by shouting. For a confused moment, she thought she was back in the apartment, listening to Diego die in the street. Then the twins started crying. She rolled out of bed, running on instinct, grabbing Marco and Luca from their bassinets. The nursery door burst open, Rosa, eyes wide, still in her nightgown. "We have to move," Rosa said urgently. "Now." "The panic room." "What's happening?" "Now, Sophia." More gunshots, closer. The sound of running feet in the hallway. A man's voice screaming, cut off abruptly. Sophia clutched the twins and ran after Rosa, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. The panic room was disguised as a linen closet at the end of the hall. Rosa yanked open the door, revealing a steel-reinforced chamber beyond. "Get inside. Don't open this door for anyone except Frank or me. You understand? Anyone." "Where's Emma?" Rosa's face went white. "I thought she was with you." A child screamed from down the hallway. Sophia's world stopped. She shoved the twins into Rosa's arms and ran before the older woman could stop her. Down the hallway, past Frank's study, toward Emma's room. The door was open. Inside, a man in black tactical gear held Emma with one arm, knife pressed against her throat with the other. Emma's stuffed rabbit lay on the floor, torn. "Don't move," the man said. His accent was thick, Eastern European, maybe Russian. "Or the girl dies." Sophia raised her hands, mind racing. The man was young, early 20s, sweating despite the cool air. Nervous. That made him more dangerous, not less. "Please," Sophia said, keeping her voice steady despite the terror screaming through her veins. "She's just a child. Take me instead." "Shut up." The man backed toward the window, dragging Emma with him. "We came for you. All of you. Reyes doesn't forget debts. The money's gone. I don't have it." "Then you're worth nothing." "But the children," the man's grip tightened on Emma, making her whimper. "Children can be sold. Reyes knows people who pay very well for pretty little girls." Something cold and murderous flowered in Sophia's chest. She'd spent years being afraid, being a victim, letting men like Diego and Mateo Reyes dictate her life through violence and threats. Not anymore. Not for her children. Sophia lunged. She didn't think, didn't plan, just moved. The man swung the knife at her face. She felt it slice across her forearm, hot and sharp, but she grabbed his wrist, twisting hard. He was stronger, but she was fighting for her daughter's life. They crashed into the wall, Emma tumbling free, scrambling toward the door. Sophia kneed the man in the groin, slammed her elbow into his face, clawed at his eyes with desperate fingers. The knife came up again. A gunshot exploded in the confined space, deafeningly loud. The man jerked backward, a red flower blooming on his chest. He hit the wall and slid down, knife clattering to the floor, eyes already glazing. Sophia spun around. Frank stood in the doorway, gun still raised, his face a mask of controlled fury. Blood spattered his collar, not his own. His eyes found Emma first, scanning for injuries, then Sophia. "You're bleeding," he said, his voice eerily calm. Sophia looked down. Her forearm was sliced open, blood streaming down to drip off her fingertips. The adrenaline was fading, and pain flooded in to replace it. "Emma," she gasped. "Is Emma?" "I'm okay, Mama." Emma ran to her, and Sophia collapsed to her knees, wrapping her daughter in blood-streaked arms, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Frank moved past them to the dead man, checking his pockets with clinical efficiency. He pulled out a phone, a wallet, a cheap plastic card that made his expression darken further. "Hired muscle," he said quietly. "Philadelphia crew. Matteo outsourced this." Giovanni appeared in the doorway, breathing hard, gun in hand. "Boss, we got 2 more. Marco's got the 3rd pinned in the kitchen. Alive. For now." "Good." Frank looked at Sophia and Emma, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. "Get them to Dr. Elena. And find Rosa, make sure the twins are secure." "Frank," Sophia started. "Not now." His voice was gentle, but final. "You did good, Mrs. Alvarez. But I need to finish this." He left without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hallway like a death march. 20 minutes later, the house was silent again. Dr. Elena stitched Sophia's arm with practiced efficiency while Emma sat nearby, wrapped in blankets, clutching her ruined rabbit. The twins were in Rosa's arms, mercifully oblivious to the violence that had erupted around them. 16 stitches, Dr. Elena said, tying off the last suture. "You're lucky. That knife went deep, but missed everything important." "Nothing feels lucky right now," Sophia whispered. Down the hall, she could hear voices, Frank's low and controlled, another man's rising in panic. Then a single gunshot, and silence. Emma flinched at the sound. Sophia pulled her close. "It's over," Sophia said, not sure if she was lying. "It's over now." But when Frank returned an hour later, still wearing his blood-spattered shirt, his expression told a different story. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "All of you. We're leaving in an hour." "Leaving?" Rosa stood, alarmed. "Frank, where?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere Matteo Reyes will never find them." Frank's eyes met Sophia's. "I made a mistake. I gave him time to run, and he used it to bring the war to my door. I won't make that mistake again." "What are you going to do?" Sophia asked, though she already knew. Frank didn't answer immediately. He looked at Emma, at the twins, at the home that had become a battlefield. "What I should have done 3 days ago," he said finally. "I'm going to erase them." His voice was soft, quiet, utterly certain. And Sophia understood that somewhere in the city, Matteo Reyes had just become a dead man. He just didn't know it yet. The safe house was 40 miles outside the city, hidden behind overgrown woods and a gravel road that didn't appear on any map. Jerome had the property under 6 different shell companies, taxes paid through offshore accounts, utilities registered to people who'd been dead for a decade. Frank installed Sophia and the children there at dawn, with Rosa to care for them and 4 of his most trusted men rotating shifts outside. The house was warm, well-stocked, and completely isolated. "How long?" Sophia asked as Frank prepared to leave. "As long as it takes." He looked at Emma, who sat on the couch clutching her rabbit, silent since the attack. "A few days. Maybe a week. And then you'll be free." Frank knelt in front of Emma, his voice softening. "I'm going to make sure the bad men never come back. You understand?" Emma nodded slowly. "You're going to fight the dragons?" "Yes." "Will you come back?" Her voice was so small it nearly broke him. "I always come back," Frank said, and hoped it was true. Frank returned to the city as the sun climbed higher, turning the skyline gold and merciless. Giovanni drove in silence, understanding that words were unnecessary now. They'd reached the point where violence became inevitable, the moment when all other options had been exhausted and only blood could settle the debt. The war room in Frank's downtown office was already filled when he arrived. Jerome, Vince, Marco, and 5 other men whose loyalty had been tested in ways that left no room for doubt. A map of the city covered the table, marked with red circles: Reyes operations, safe houses, legitimate businesses that served as fronts. Frank stood at the head of the table and spoke 2 words: erase them. The room went silent. Everything, Frank continued, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. Every operation, every asset, every person who took Mateo's money and followed his orders. I want the Reyes name to become a cautionary tale that parents tell their children. The other families will notice, Jerome said carefully. This kind of move. Let them notice. Let them understand what happens when someone brings violence to my home. When they threaten children under my protection. Frank's eyes swept the room. I'm not asking for approval. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Anyone uncomfortable with that can leave now. Nobody moved. Good. Frank pointed to the map. Jerome, you handle the financial side. Freeze their accounts, expose their operations to federal authorities, burn every bridge they've built. Vince, you take the street operations, gambling houses, distribution points, collection routes. I want them shut down by midnight. Marco, you're with me. We're paying Mateo a visit. What about Carlos? Marco asked. The brother. Frank was quiet for a moment, remembering the tired eyes, the boxer's hands, the man who'd looked like he wanted out but didn't know how. Give him one chance, Frank said finally. Tell him his brother's finished, and he can walk away clean or go down with him. His choice. Within the hour, the machinery of Frank's empire turned toward a single purpose: total destruction. Bank accounts drained or frozen. Anonymous tips to federal investigators about money laundering, weapons trafficking, human smuggling. Gambling operations raided by cops who suddenly remembered their duty. Dealers and enforcers approached with simple offers: disappear or answer for your crimes. By noon, the Reyes organization was hemorrhaging. By sunset, it was dying. And at midnight, Frank Costello walked through the front door of Mateo Reyes's fortified warehouse with Marco beside him and vengeance in his heart, ready to finish what Rain and Mercy had started. The warehouse on Pier 23 was lit up like a fortress under siege, which Frank supposed it was. Floodlights blazed from every corner, guards patrolling with visible weapons, the kind of obvious security that screamed desperation. Mateo Reyes knew he was dying. He just didn't know how fast. Frank and Marco approached from the waterside, using the darkness and fog rolling off the harbor as cover. 2 guards stood at the loading dock entrance, smoking cigarettes, trying to look alert despite the exhaustion that came from 3 days of high alert. They never heard Marco coming. 2 quick strikes, professional, efficient, silent. The guards crumpled, and Marco dragged them into shadow while Frank opened the door with keys Jerome's people had acquired from a former Reyes employee who decided cooperation was healthier than loyalty. Inside, the warehouse smelled of machine oil, salt water, and fear. The legitimate furniture business operated on the ground floor, empty now, just shadows and shrouded shapes. Frank and Marco moved through it like smoke, finding the stairs to the second floor. More guards. These ones didn't go down quietly. The first one managed to shout before Marco's hand closed over his mouth. Gunfire erupted, 3 shots that echoed through the metal building like thunder. Frank returned fire, dropping 1 guard, then another. The third ran, screaming for backup. So much for subtle, Marco muttered, reloading. Subtle was never the point, Frank said, moving toward the stairs to the 3rd floor. I want Mateo to hear us coming. The 3rd floor was chaos. Men scrambling for weapons, shouting contradictory orders, panic spreading like wildfire. Frank and Marco came up the stairs into a hail of bullets that chewed through drywall and shattered overhead lights. Frank didn't flinch. He'd been shot at by better men with better aim. He fired twice, precise, controlled, and 2 more guards fell. Mateo. Frank's voice cut through the gunfire. This is your last chance. Walk out now, and I'll make it quick. The shooting stopped. In the sudden silence, Frank heard footsteps, someone running deeper into the building. He followed the sound, Marco covering his flank, until they reached Matteo's office. The door was reinforced steel, the kind meant to withstand battering rams and shaped charges. But it was standing open, and through it, Frank could see Matteo Reyes standing behind his desk, gun shaking in his hand, face pale and slick with sweat. Carlos Reyes stood between Frank and his brother. "Don't," Carlos said quietly. "No weapon. Just his body, blocking the path. Please." Frank studied him. "I gave you a choice. Walk away clean. Why are you still here?" "He's my brother. He sent men to kill children in their beds." "I know." Carlos's voice broke. "I know what he is. What we are. But he's still my brother." Behind Carlos, Matteo's gun wavered. "Carlos, move. I can handle this." "No, Matteo. You can't." Carlos didn't turn around. His eyes stayed on Frank. "I know why you're here. I know what we've done. And I know there's no walking away from this. But I'm asking you, please, let him leave. Let him run. He'll disappear, never come back. I'll make sure of it. Like you made sure he didn't attack my home?" Frank's voice was cold. "Like you made sure he didn't send hired killers after a woman and 3 children?" "I didn't know." "You knew enough." Frank raised his gun, aiming past Carlos at Matteo. "Last chance, Carlos. Move, or go down with him." For a long moment, Carlos didn't move. Frank could see the war behind his eyes, loyalty versus survival, blood versus sense. Then Carlos stepped aside. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though Frank wasn't sure who he was apologizing to. Matteo's face twisted with rage and betrayal. "You coward. You." Frank fired. The bullet took Matteo in the shoulder, spinning him around. He crashed into the window behind his desk, gun falling from his hand. Before he could recover, Frank was across the room, grabbing him by his expensive suit, slamming him against the glass hard enough to crack it. "You came to my home," Frank said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You threatened children. Innocent children who'd done nothing except have the misfortune of being born to the wrong father." "The debt," Matteo gasped, blood spreading across his shirt. "The debt lives." "No." Frank's grip tightened. "The debt dies. Right here. Right now. And so do you." He shoved Matteo toward the broken window. The glass gave way, and Matteo tumbled backward into the night, his scream cutting off abruptly 3 stories below. Frank stood at the window, looking down at the crumpled shape on the concrete, then turned to Carlos. "You have 24 hours to disappear," Frank said. "Take whatever money you can carry, and go somewhere I'll never hear your name again. If I see you, if I hear about you, if you so much as send a postcard to this city, I'll finish what I started tonight. Understood?" Carlos nodded, his face gray. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because Emma asked me if I was still sad about my sister, and I realized I was tired of creating orphans." Frank walked past him toward the stairs. "You've got one chance to not waste yours." By the time Frank and Marco reached the ground floor, sirens were wailing in the distance. Jerome had ensured the police response would be delayed, but not forever. They slipped out through the loading dock, past the unconscious guards, into the fog. Giovanni had the car running 2 blocks away. They drove in silence through empty streets, the city passing by like a dream, until Frank's phone rang. Jerome's voice, "It's done, boss. Bank accounts seized by the feds. Street operations shut down. 3 of his lieutenants just turned state's evidence to save themselves. The Reyes organization is finished." "Good." Frank hung up and leaned back, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the hollow ache that always came after violence. "Take me to the safe house." "Boss, you should rest." "The safe house, Giovanni." They drove through the night, leaving the city behind, following roads that grew narrower and darker until they reached the gravel driveway. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Frank found Rosa in the kitchen, making coffee. "They're still sleeping," she said quietly. "All of them." Emma had nightmares, but she settled down around 3. Frank nodded and climbed the stairs. He found Sophia's room first, door slightly open, the woman asleep in a chair next to the twins' cribs, one hand resting on Marco's back as if reassuring herself he was still breathing. Down the hall, Emma's door was also open. The little girl was curled under blankets, her ruined rabbit clutched tight, face peaceful in sleep. Frank stood in the doorway, watching her breathe, and felt the weight of the night settle onto his shoulders. He'd killed Mateo Reyes. Destroyed an entire criminal organization. Sentenced men to prison or death with nothing more than a phone call. And he'd do it all again in a heartbeat if it meant this child could sleep safely. Uncle Knight. Emma's voice, sleepy and small. Frank stepped into the room. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you. Did you fight the dragons? Yes. Did you win? Frank sat on the edge of her bed. Yes. They're gone. All of them. They can't hurt you anymore. Emma sat up and threw her arms around his neck, holding him with surprising strength. I knew you would. Knights always win. Frank's eyes burned. He held her carefully, this tiny person who decided he was worth believing in, and let himself feel something he hadn't allowed in 30 years, hope. Get some sleep, he whispered. When you wake up, we'll go home. You're home. Frank thought about the mansion, about Rosa's cooking and Dr. Elena's steady presence, about the nursery that had been empty for so long, now filled with crying babies and life. Yes, he said. My home. If you want. Emma pulled back, studying his face with those enormous eyes. Can Mama and Marco and Luca come too? Of course. Then yes. I want. She lay back down, smiling. Thank you, Uncle Knight. Frank stood, tucking the blanket around her one more time. As he reached the door, she called out sleepily. Uncle Knight? You're not sad anymore, are you? Frank looked back at her, at this child who'd survived so much and still believed in knights and happy endings. No, he said, and realized it was true. Not anymore. He closed the door quietly and walked downstairs, where Rosa handed him coffee and asked no questions about the blood on his shirt or the exhaustion in his eyes. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the fog, warming the earth. Inside, Frank Costello sat at the kitchen table and thought about the future, not his empire, not his reputation, but the sound of children laughing in rooms that had been silent too long. And for the first time in 3 decades, the future didn't look like revenge. It looked like redemption. 3 months later, the mansion felt different. Not in any obvious way. The walls were still the same dark brick, the gates still iron and imposing, the guards still patrolling the perimeter with professional vigilance. But something fundamental had shifted, like a house that had been holding its breath for decades finally exhaling. The nursery that had sat empty since Isabella died now overflowed with life. Marco and Luca had grown from fragile premature infants into healthy, chubby babies who screamed when hungry and cooed when content. Dr. Elena still visited twice a week, but now her bag contained routine checkup equipment instead of emergency supplies. Emma had claimed the room next to Frank's study as her own, decorating it with drawings that covered every available surface. Knights and dragons, mostly. But lately, she'd started drawing other things. Families sitting at dinner tables, children playing in gardens, people smiling. Sophia had taken the position Rosa offered, officially as a household manager, unofficially as the person who'd brought warmth back to cold spaces. She handled the staff, organized the schedules, and somehow transformed Frank's fortress into something that felt like a home. But more than that, she'd started working with a women's shelter downtown. 3 days a week, she counseled women who'd survived what she'd survived, who understood that debts didn't always die with the debtor, who knew what it meant to run through rain with children you'd die protecting. Frank found her there one afternoon, having arrived unannounced to drive her home. She was talking to a young mother, maybe 22, who clutched a sleeping infant and flinched at every sudden sound. You're safe here, Sophia said quietly, her hand resting gently on the woman's shoulder. I promise. Nobody gets through these doors unless we let them. The young woman looked up, tears streaming. How do you know? How do you know they won't find me? Because someone once promised me the same thing, Sophia said. And he kept that promise. Now I'm keeping it for you. Frank waited in the doorway until Sophia finished, until the young mother was settled in a secure room with her baby, until Sophia could step away. You didn't have to come, she said, but she smiled when she said it. Emma wanted to show you something. Frank held up a rolled paper. She made me promise to bring you home before dinner. They drove back through streets Sophia had once run through in terror. Now they just looked like streets, crowded, ordinary, harmless. The ghosts that had chased her were gone, erased as thoroughly as Frank had promised. At the mansion, Emma waited at the door, practically vibrating with excitement. "Close your eyes, Mama. Both of you." Sophia glanced at Frank, who shrugged. They closed their eyes and Emma took their hands, one of Sophia's, one of Frank's, leading them through the foyer down the hallway into the study. "Okay. Open." The drawing covered half the desk, Emma's largest work yet. It showed the mansion, rendered in crayon with childish precision. In the garden, stick figures played, Emma, Marco, Luca. Rosa stood near the house, arms full of what might have been laundry or groceries. Dr. Elena carried her doctor's bag. And in the center, two figures stood side by side. One figure wore a suit, standing tall with dark hair. The other wore a blue dress, long hair flowing. Between them, Emma had drawn their hands touching, not quite holding, but close enough that the intention was clear. Above the scene, written in careful block letters, "My family." Sophia's breath caught. Frank stood perfectly still, staring at the drawing as if it might disappear if he looked away. "Do you like it?" Emma asked, suddenly uncertain. "I worked really hard. Rosa helped me spell family." "It's perfect," Sophia whispered, kneeling to pull Emma into a hug. "It's absolutely perfect, sweetheart." Emma beamed, then looked at Frank. "Uncle Knight? Do you like it?" Frank couldn't speak. He was thinking about Isabella, about the beach photograph on his wall, about 30 years of rage and grief that had defined every choice he'd made. About the little boy who'd hidden in a closet while his world ended, who'd grown into a man so consumed by vengeance that he'd forgotten what he was actually trying to protect. He was thinking about a woman standing in the rain with dying babies, and how easily he could have driven past. How close he'd come to being just another monster who let innocent people drown. "Uncle Knight." Emma's voice was worried now. Frank knelt down, eye level with her. "Emma, can I tell you something?" She nodded seriously. "When I lost my sister, I thought I'd never stop being sad. I thought the only thing I could do was make sure bad things happened to bad people. That's all I knew how to do." He glanced at the drawing, then back at Emma. "But you taught me something more important. You taught me that protecting people isn't just about fighting dragons. It's about giving them a place where dragons can't reach them." "Like here," Emma said. "Like here." Frank's voice roughened. "You asked me if I was still sad. And I said yes, every day. But I should have also said," he stopped, swallowing hard. "I should have said that sad doesn't mean forever. It just means for now." Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Frank held her, this child who decided a mob boss could be a knight, who'd seen him covered in blood and still believed he was worth loving. Over Emma's shoulder, Frank's eyes met Sophia's. She was crying silently, one hand pressed to her mouth. "Thank you," Frank said quietly, to Emma, to Sophia, to the universe that had somehow given him a second chance he didn't deserve. "Thank you for my family." That evening, after dinner, after the twins were asleep and Emma was tucked in bed, Frank stood alone in his study. He took Emma's drawing and walked to the wall where Isabella's photograph hung. The picture showed his sister laughing on a beach, frozen at 19, forever young, forever lost. Frank carefully placed Emma's drawing beside it. Two images, side by side. The past and the present. Grief and healing. What was lost and what was found. He stood there for a long time, remembering Isabella's laugh, her smile, the way she'd called him Frankie even after he'd insisted he was too old for nicknames. Remembering his mother's voice, his father's hands, the family that had been stolen from him. But also remembering Emma's arms around his neck. Marco's tiny fingers gripping his thumb. Luca's contented sighs. Sophia's quiet strength. Rosa's knowing smiles. The sound of children laughing in rooms that had been silent too long. "I couldn't save you," Frank whispered to Isabella's photograph. "But I saved them. And maybe that's what you would have wanted. For me to stop drowning in the past and start building something better." A single tear tracked down his cheek, his first in 30 years. He didn't wipe it away. Behind him, the door opened quietly. Sophia stood in the doorway, backlit by hallway light. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. You're not intruding. Frank gestured to the photographs. I was just saying goodbye to who I used to be. Sophia stepped into the room, studying the images. She was beautiful. Your sister. She was. She would have liked you. Liked Emma. She always wanted children. I think she'd be proud of you. Of what you've done for us. Frank looked at her, this woman who'd survived hell and still found the strength to help others survive theirs. I didn't do it alone. No, Sophia said softly. You didn't. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights through the window. Somewhere out there, the rain would come again eventually. Storms always came. But this time, Frank thought, they'd face it together. Not as a mob boss and a widow. Not as a protector and the protected. But as something more complicated, more human, more real. As family. Outside, clouds gathered on the horizon, not threatening, just present. Rain would come tomorrow, gentle and cleansing, washing the streets clean. And when it did, Frank Costello would be ready. Not with guns or vengeance or the cold certainty of violence. But with the knowledge that sometimes, the strongest thing a man could do wasn't destroy his enemies. It was protect what he loved. And for the first time in 30 years, as rain began to fall softly against the windows, Frank Costello stood in his study with photographs of past and present side by side, and felt something he'd thought was lost forever. Peace.